It began with a single, misplaced ledger in a flooded basement in Brussels. Not a grand volume, not a gilded chronicle of kings, just a series of tax exemptions from the late 18th century that didn't quite resolve. We are taught that history is a solid thing, a foundation of stone and parchment upon which the present is built, but when you look closer, the mortar is crumbling. The ledger recorded a lineage of minor nobility, the house of Saxe-Coburg-Gotha, long before they became the architects of the modern European map. But the numbers were wrong. The load distribution of their wealth didn't match their land holdings. There were payouts to individuals who, according to official parish records, had died decades prior. Not errors, not oversights, something else. Ask yourself why a family of provincial administrators suddenly found themselves occupying every significant throne in the Western world within the span of 3 generations. It wasn't just diplomacy, it wasn't just luck. It was an orchestrated expansion of a specific biological data set. As I traced these discrepancies, I realized that the official genealogical trees we see in museums are not maps of kinship. They are redaction layers. They are meant to obscure a deeper, more unsettling continuity. Consider the physical reality of the royal body. We view the monarch as a symbol, an abstraction of the state, but they are also a biological vessel. In the archives of the Royal Society, tucked behind layers of institutional gatekeeping, there are medical reports from the 19th century that defy standard pathology. They speak of a specific resilience, a peculiar resistance to the environmental decays that claimed the lives of the common populace. Haemophilia is the narrative we are given, the royal disease, a tragic flaw that humanizes the elite. But what if haemophilia wasn't the anomaly? What if it was the byproduct of a failed attempt to isolate a different trait entirely? I found myself standing outside the gates of Clarence House, watching the tourists snap photos of the stone masonry, wondering how many of them realised that the very architecture was designed to shield a physical reality they couldn't begin to comprehend. The walls are thick, not just for security, but for containment. There is a specific frequency to the silence of the aristocracy. It is the silence of a laboratory. It is the silence of a breeding program that has never officially ended. Look at the eyes in the portraits, not the colour, not the expression. The limbal ring. In the high nobility of Europe, the ratio of the iris to the pupil often deviates from the mean. A minor detail, a quirk of lighting perhaps, or perhaps a signature of something that hasn't been fully erased. The pattern expands as you move from the local to the global. You see it in the way the colonial administrations were structured. They didn't just extract resources, they mapped blood. In India, in Africa, in the Caribbean, the British Crown's first priority was always the cataloguing of indigenous lineages. They were looking for something. They were comparing the local strains to their own. Why would a maritime empire care about the genetic markers of a mountain tribe in the Hindu Kush, unless they were searching for a common ancestor that predates our recorded history? I tracked a series of private correspondences between Queen Victoria's personal physicians and various explorers funded by the Royal Geographical Society. These weren't reports on trade routes. They were hematological studies. They were analysing the viscosity of blood at high altitudes. They were looking for a specific protein signature, one that matched the anomalies found in that flooded basement in Brussels. The institutional erasure is so thorough that the absence of information becomes a shape in itself. When you remove a vital organ from a body, the surrounding tissue collapses into the void. History is full of these collapses. Entire dynasties vanished. their records burned, their palaces repurposed, not because they failed, because they were merged. Think about the concept of blue blood. We dismiss it as a metaphor for the visible veins of the pale-skinned elite who didn't work in the sun. But in the vocabulary of the occult, and in the private journals of the alchemists who served the courts of the Tudors and the Stuarts, the term is literal. They believed in a different chemistry, not the iron-based oxygen transport we understand today, something else, something involving copper or gold. It sounds like madness. It sounds like the rambling of a pseudo-academic mind lost in the weeds of conspiracy. But then you look at the load distribution of the crown jewels, the sheer weight of the stones, the specific placement of the metals against the skin during a coronation. It isn't just jewelry, it's an interface. Ask yourself why the coronation ceremony is the only event in modern life that still requires a physical anointing with oil behind a screen, away from the eyes of the cameras. What is being hidden? What physical reaction is being triggered by the contact of consecrated oil and ancient gold? The screen isn't for modesty, it's for the protection of the observer. There is a level of radiation, not nuclear but biological, that the uninitiated are not meant to see. If you follow the trail long enough, you realize that the royal families are not the masters of the world. They are the stewards of a heritage they themselves might not fully understand. They are the custodians of a genetic archive. This realization hit me while I was exploring the abandoned bunkers beneath a manor in Norfolk. The air was stale, smelling of damp earth and old electricity. I found a series of glass slides, meticulously labelled in a hand that looked remarkably like that of a young Prince Albert. They weren't slides of plants or animals, they were slides of skin tissue. Under a portable microscope, the cellular structure looked wrong. The nuclei were too large. The spacing was too precise. It looked like a circuit board. This is the urban exploration of the soul, digging through the discarded remains of a civilization to find the blueprints of its creators. The gatekeepers tell us that we are all the same, that we are one species, but the evidence suggests a divergence, a fork in the road of human evolution that was taken in secret thousands of years ago. The royal bloodlines are the survivors of that fork. They are the remnants of a precursor state that has been hiding in plain sight, wearing the crowns we gave them to keep them occupied. The institutional gatekeeping is most visible in the way we teach genetics. We are taught about Mendel and his peas, about the simple, dominant and recessive traits that determine our height and our hair colour. We are never taught about the epigenetic triggers that can be passed down through trauma or through ritual. The royals understand this. Their entire lives are a series of rituals designed to keep certain genes active, the specific timing of their births, the precise geometry of their homes, the repetitive nature of their public appearances. It is all a maintenance cycle. What if the monarchy isn't a form of government, but a form of biotechnical preservation? The palaces are not homes. They are life support systems. When a king dies, the phrase, "the king is dead, long live the king," isn't just about the continuity of the office, it's about the continuity of the biological signal, the signal that was captured in those Brussels tax ledgers, the signal that the explorers were looking for in the Hindu Kush. It is a persistent hum beneath the noise of history, not a ghost, not a god, something else. I began to look for the erasure trope in the biographies of the minor royals, those who were unfit for the throne, those who were sent away to sanatoriums or hidden in country estates. In every generation, there are those whose biological traits manifest too strongly. They cannot pass for human. They cannot perform the role. They are the monsters in the attic, the ones who were never photographed, whose names were scrubbed from the rolls. I found a reference to a Prince John who was kept in a secluded cottage on the Sandringham estate until his death at age 13. The official story is epilepsy, but the testimonies of the staff, whispered in the local pubs for decades, spoke of something different. They spoke of a child who didn't need light to see. They spoke of a child whose voice sounded like two people speaking at once. Ask yourself, what happens to the genetic material of these failures? Is it discarded or is it refined? The pattern suggests a constant process of distillation. We are looking at the final stages of a project that has been running for millennia. The contrast of scale is staggering. On one hand, you have the petty scandals of the tabloids, the divorces, the gaffes, the fashion choices. On the other, you have the silent movement of tectonic plates. The royal bloodlines are the mountains that remain when the weather of democracy passes. They have seen empires rise and fall, and they have remained unchanged because they are not part of the same timeline. They operate on a biological clock that ticks once for every 1,000 of our heartbeats. This is why they seem so distant, so wooden, so out of touch. They aren't in our world. They are merely visiting it. The staccato rhythm of their lives, the seasons, the tours, the ceremonies, is designed to sync their slower metabolism with our frantic, short-lived reality. It is a performance of humanity, a mask of flesh. And if you look closely at the edges of the mask, you can see where the glue is starting to fail. You can see the shadow of the thing underneath. Why now? Why is the veil thinning? Perhaps because the environment they were designed to inhabit is returning. As the planet warms, as the magnetic poles shift, as the radiation levels rise, the anomalies in their blood are becoming advantages. The resilience reported by the 19th century doctors is no longer a secret curiosity. It is a survival strategy. The erasure is becoming harder to maintain because the world is becoming more like them. We are entering an era of extreme load distribution, where the old structures of power are being stretched to their breaking point, and the royals are waiting. They are not afraid of the collapse. They are the architects of it. They have been waiting for the atmosphere to match their internal chemistry. The mystery isn't who they are. The mystery is what they are waiting for us to become, or rather, what they are waiting for us to stop being. The investigation leads to a room with no doors. I have followed the paper trail from Brussels to London to the archives of the Vatican, and it always ends in the same place: a blank page, a redacted paragraph, a missing file. The institutional gatekeeping is perfect because it is built into our own perception. We cannot see the truth because we lack the vocabulary to describe it. We see a king and we think power. We see a queen and we think tradition. We never think organism. We never think specimen. But if you strip away the titles and the velvet, if you ignore the history books and the propaganda, you are left with a biological reality that is fundamentally different from your own. Not better, not worse, something else. Ask yourself, if you were a different species living among sheep, would you tell them, or would you simply wear the wool and lead them to the shearer? The loop remains open. The evidence is there, hidden in the open, waiting for someone to stop looking at the crown and start looking at the head beneath it. The mystery of the royal bloodline isn't a secret they are keeping from us. It's a secret we are keeping from ourselves. What if the blood isn't blue? What if it's gold? What if it's something we haven't even named yet? The silence of the archives is not an empty thing. It is a presence. It is a density. As I moved deeper into the private collections of the European genealogical societies, the air grew thick with the scent of binding glue and decaying animal skin. To understand the royal bloodlines, one must first understand the nature of the archive. It is not a repository of truth. It is a filter. It is designed to trap the light of certain facts while allowing the shadows of others to pass through. I found myself obsessing over the black books of the Austrian Habsburgs, records that were never meant to survive the dissolution of the empire. They do not speak of land or of titles. They speak of intervals. They speak of the precise number of seconds between the first breath of a prince and the last breath of his predecessor. They speak of a synchronization that defies the laws of chance. Ask yourself, why would a dynasty keep a record of the exact atmospheric pressure at the moment of a royal conception? Not once, not twice, for 600 years. Not a hobby, not a superstition, a calibration. The Habsburg jaw, that famous protrusion of the lower mandible that haunted the portraits of the Spanish and Austrian branches, is always presented as the quintessential example of the dangers of inbreeding. The history books treat it as a cautionary tale of genetic vanity. But what if we are looking at it from the wrong end of the telescope? In the architectural language of the face, the jaw is the foundation of the skull. It determines the load distribution of the entire cranium. I consulted with a retired maxillofacial surgeon who had spent years studying the skeletal remains of European nobility. He pointed out something the historians missed. The structural integrity of those deformed jaws was actually superior to the average human specimen. They were designed to withstand a level of muscular tension that would shatter a normal human face. Why? What were they biting? Or rather, what were they us speaking? There are phonemes, sounds, vibrations, frequencies that the human vocal apparatus is not designed to produce, unless the apparatus is modified, not by evolution, not by accident, by design. This brings us to the concept of the great work of the medieval alchemists. We are told they were foolish men trying to turn lead into gold. This is the official narrative, the institutional gatekeeping that prevents us from seeing the chemical reality of the elite. They weren't interested in the gold of the treasury. They were interested in the gold of the blood. If you look at the composition of the holy oils used in the anointing ceremonies of the Merovingian kings, you find trace amounts of monatomic elements. These are substances that do not behave according to the standard laws of physics. They are superconductors. They allow for the transmission of information across cellular membranes at a speed that borders on the instantaneous. They are the hardware of the royal body. Not this metal, not that metal. Something else. A biological gold that allows the nervous system to process reality at a different resolution. What if the divine right of kings was actually a literal description of a different neurological state? A state where the mind is not confined to the skull, but is linked to a wider, older network. I tracked this network to the subterranean levels of the City of London, not the sewers, not the tube, the private tunnels that connect the palaces to the financial centres. These are the arteries of the occult state. In the walls of these tunnels, there are engravings that predate the Roman occupation. They depict a lineage of beings that are always shown slightly taller, slightly paler, and always carrying a vessel of fluid. The vessel is never offered to the people. It is shared only among themselves. It is the literalization of the bloodline. I found a diary entry from a mason who worked on the foundations of Buckingham Palace in the 1840s. He wrote of finding a well of mercury deep beneath the site, a pool of liquid metal that didn't flow but pulsed. He was told to seal it. He was told it was a genealogical anomaly, but he noted that the royal family spent hours in the room directly above it in total silence. Ask yourself, what kind of energy were they drawing from the earth? What kind of grounding were they seeking? The institutional erasure is most profound when it comes to the disappeared children of the 17th century. In the court of Louis IV, the Sun King, there was a sudden and unexplained spike in infant mortality among the highest levels of the aristocracy. The official records blame the vapours or bad air. But the private journals of the court embalmers tell a different story. They describe bodies that didn't decay. They describe infants whose bones were as dense as stone and whose blood had the consistency of honey. These weren't deaths, they were harvests. The strongest specimens were being taken, moved to a location that doesn't appear on any map, a reserve for the bloodline, not here, not there, somewhere else. This is the origin of the secret societies that the conspiracy theorists love to obsess over. But the societies aren't political, they are biological. They are the nursery for the next stage of the project. We see the reflection of this project in the way the royal family interacts with the modern world. They are the ultimate celebrities, yet they are entirely unknowable. We know what they wear, but we don't know what they think. We know where they go, but we don't know why. They are the ultimate grey men of history, hiding in the brightest light possible. The staccato rhythm of their public appearances is a form of camouflage. By being everywhere, they are nowhere. They have mastered the art of being a visual white noise, and while we are distracted by the weddings and the funerals, the load distribution of global power is being shifted. The bloodlines are no longer interested in thrones. They are interested in infrastructure. They are moving from the decorative to the functional. They are the owners of the data centers, the controllers of the satellite arrays, the silent partners in the pharmaceutical giants that are re-engineering the human genome. They are no longer wearing crowns. They are wearing the world. Think of the king's touch, the ancient belief that a monarch could cure scrofula by simply laying their hands on the sick. We dismiss this as medieval superstition. But what if it was a demonstration of a bioelectric capability? What if the royal bloodline produces a field that can reorganize the cellular structure of those around it? This would explain the strange charisma of the elite, the way people lose their ability to think critically in their presence. It isn't just fame, it's a frequency. I interviewed a former guard at Windsor Castle who spoke of the heaviness of the air whenever the Queen was in the room. He didn't mean it metaphorically. He meant a physical change in the air pressure, a humming in the ears, a metallic taste on the tongue. These are the symptoms of a high energy field, not magic, not mystery. Physics, a physics that has been hidden from us by the institutional gatekeepers who want us to believe in a flat, mundane world. The pattern is global. You find it in the dragon emperors of China, the children of the sun in the Americas, the pharaohs of Egypt. They all claimed a different biological origin. They all maintained strict breeding protocols. They all used specific metals and stones to focus their power, and they all eventually ascended or vanished, leaving behind a population that felt a phantom limb where their leaders used to be. The European royals are simply the most recent iteration of this pattern. They are the ones who stayed behind to manage the transition. But transition to what? To a world where the bloodline is no longer necessary, or to a world where we all become part of the bloodline, whether we want to or not? What if the ultimate goal of the great work isn't the elevation of the elite, but the total assimilation of the species? I stood in the centre of the labyrinth at Chartres Cathedral, following the stones with my eyes. The labyrinth is a map of the bloodline, a single, winding path that leads to a centre that is also a beginning. There are no dead ends in the royal lineage, there are only loops. Not this path, not that path, the only path. The erasure trope suggests that we are at the end of history, that the age of kings is over. But if you look at the low distribution of the world's wealth, the power is more concentrated now than it was in the time of Charlemagne. The kings haven't gone away. They have just become invisible. They have retreated into the blood. And as I looked at the centre of the labyrinth, I realised that the unusual thing about the royal bloodline isn't that it's different. It's that it's the only thing that's real. The rest of us are just the background noise. We are the scaffolding. We are the fuel. Ask yourself, why is there such a visceral reaction to the idea of a commoner marrying into the family? It isn't snobbery. It's a containment breach. It's the introduction of noisy data into a clean system. And yet it happens. Why? Perhaps because the system needs occasional updates, a new strain of resistance, a new way to interface with the changing world. The commoners who are chosen are never truly common. They are carefully selected for a specific genetic compatibility that they themselves aren't aware of. They are sleeper cells of the bloodline, being called back to the source. The mystery of the royal bloodline is a mystery of the self. If they are different, then what are we? If they are the stewards, who are the masters? The investigation doesn't end. It just gets quieter. It moves from the archives to the skin, from the ledger to the heartbeat. Not this life, not that life, something else. The unresolved loop continues to spin, and the only way to close it is to look into the mirror and ask, whose blood is moving my hands? Whose history am I living? The answer is hidden in the silence of the crown. The silence that follows a discovery is often more terrifying than the discovery itself. In the high-altitude archives of the Swiss Alps, where the climate is naturally regulated to prevent the oxidation of ink, I found the correspondence of the ciphers. These were letters exchanged between the royal houses of Europe during the height of the Black Death, while the rest of the world was collapsing into a charnel house of plague and despair. The elite were discussing something they called the clarification. They weren't mourning. They weren't afraid. They were observing. They noted with clinical precision how the common ichor of the peasantry succumbed to the pestilence, while their own resonant fluid remained undisturbed. Not immunity, not luck. Something else. A fundamental difference in the way their bodies interacted with the microbial world. Ask yourself, if a fire sweeps through a forest and leaves only one species of tree standing, is that tree merely lucky, or is it made of something that doesn't burn? The low distribution of power during a crisis always shifts toward the centre, but the royals took it further. They used the plague as a sieve. They watched as the old blood of the world was purged, leaving a vacuum that only their specific lineage could fill. This is the ultimate institutional gatekeeping, the monopolization of survival. I found a map in a private collection in Geneva that didn't show borders or cities. It showed lines of vitality. It was a topographical representation of blood density across the continent. The highest concentrations weren't in the cities, but in the remote hunting lodges and summer palaces of the nobility. These sites were chosen not for their beauty, but for their geological properties. They were built on intersections of quartz and iron, places where the Earth's natural magnetism could be harnessed to stabilize the blue chemistry of their veins. The urban exploration of these sites reveals a hidden architecture, copper grounding rods that run hundreds of feet into the bedrock, rooms lined with leaded glass, and ventilation systems that filter the air through silver mesh. Think about the obsession with purity. We are told it is about social status, about keeping the wealth within the family. But in the rhythmic, staccato records of the court physicians, purity is a technical requirement. A single, impure union doesn't just dilute the status, it destabilizes the frequency. It introduces jitter into the biological signal. I found a series of autopsy reports from the mid-20th century, conducted in secret after a minor royal disappeared from public life. The liver was described as having a crystalline structure. The heart didn't show the usual signs of muscular decay. It looked as though it had been petrified while still beating. This is the erasure trope in its most physical form. The body itself becomes a piece of evidence that must be destroyed. The records were signed by men who didn't exist, representing agencies that have no name. Not this department, not that bureau. Something else. An invisible oversight committee that ensures the biological secret never reaches the peer-reviewed journals of the common world. The contrast of scale between our lives and theirs is nowhere more evident than in the concept of long-term planning. A corporation thinks in quarters. A government thinks in 4-year terms. A royal bloodline thinks in centuries. They are currently executing maneuvers that were initiated during the Renaissance. When you look at the unusual movements of royal wealth into green, technologies and seed banks, you aren't seeing environmentalism. You are seeing the preparation for a world that has been clarified. They are gathering the genetic blueprints of the planet's flora and fauna, not to save them for us, but to curate a world that suits their specific needs. They are the gardeners of a future we aren't invited to inhabit. Ask yourself, why would a family that owns the most valuable real estate on the planet be so interested in the permafrost of Svalbard, unless they know that the current climate is just a temporary phase, a brief window of noise before the silence returns? The technical language of the bloodline is hidden in the heraldry. Those lions, unicorns, and griffins aren't just symbols. They are encoded descriptions of genetic traits. The lion represents the strength of the nervous system. The unicorn represents the purity of the endocrine signal. The griffin is the hybrid, the successful integration of different biological functions. When two houses merge their coats of arms, they aren't just combining their lands, they are announcing a successful splicing of their capabilities. I spent months decoding the windows of a chapel in the Loire Valley, and what I found wasn't a religious narrative. It was a manual for biological engineering. It described the transmutation of the fluids through the use of specific sound frequencies. The pipe organs in these chapels weren't for music, they were for calibration. They were used to tune the blood of the young princes and princesses before they reached puberty. The staccato notes of the Gregorian chants were the trigger codes for the epigenetic switches. This is the unsettling reality of the investigative essayist. The more you find, the more you realize how much has been erased. Every time I found a lead, it was followed by a fire in an archive or the accidental loss of a digital database. The gatekeepers are active. They are watching the watchers. I began to notice the same car, a nondescript dark-coloured sedan, parked outside every library I visited. Not a threat, not a warning, a presence, a reminder that the forbidden knowledge I was seeking was already known, already managed, and already contained. The sense of mystery began to turn into a sense of being part of the experiment. What if my investigation was also a ritual? What if by uncovering these patterns, I was simply reinforcing the signal? What if the unusual thing about the royal bloodline is that it requires our observation to function? Like a quantum particle that changes state when looked at, the bloodline adapts to the level of awareness of the populace. Consider the divine right once more. In the ancient world, the king was the land. If the king was healthy, the crops grew. If the king was sick, the land withered. This isn't poetry, it's a description of a feedback loop. The royal body acts as a transponder for the local ecosystem. They are the load, distribution center for the planet's biorhythms. This is why their deaths are marked by such profound national mourning. It isn't just grief, it's a systemic shock. The signal has been cut, and the collective subconscious feels the drop in voltage. The staccato sentences of the news anchors, the rhythmic tolling of the bells, these are the sounds of a system trying to find a new frequency. And they always find it. They always find a new vessel. Not this person, not that person. The next one in the sequence, the one whose blood has been prepared. We are taught to believe in the great man theory of history, but we should be looking at the great blood theory. The individuals are interchangeable. The data is permanent. The royal family is a distributed network, a blockchain of biological information that has been running since the dawn of civilization. They are the unusual anomaly in the middle of a mundane world, the glitch in the matrix that proves the matrix exists. And as I sit here, surrounded by photocopies of redacted ledgers and blurry photos of crystalline organs, I realize that the investigation is never over. The pattern is too large to see in its entirety. You can only see the edges. You can only feel the tension. You can only ask the questions that have no answers. What if the bloodline isn't just a family? What if it's a technology? What if the kings are just the hardware and the royal blood is the software that runs the world? The final loop remains open. In a small church in rural Bavaria, there is a tomb that is perpetually warm to the touch. The local priests refuse to discuss it. The government has cordoned it off. But if you listen closely to the stone, you can hear a faint, rhythmic pulsing. It isn't a heartbeat, it's a transmission. It is the sound of the bloodline communicating with itself across the barriers of time and death. It is the sound of the erasure failing. And in that sound, you realize the true scale of the mystery. We aren't looking at a history of power. We are looking at a history of an alien biology trying to make itself at home on a planet that doesn't quite fit. The royals are the unusual ones because they are the only ones who are still trying to remember where they came from. The rest of us have forgotten that we were ever anything else. Ask yourself one last thing. Why do you care? Why does the idea of royal blood fascinate and repel us in equal measure? Perhaps because somewhere, deep in our own noisy and impure DNA, there is a remnant of the original code, a ghost of the signal, a memory of the time when we weren't the background noise, but part of the song. The investigation is not just about them, it is about the part of us that they took, the part they erased, and the part they are still using to power their world. The script isn't finished, the documentary isn't over, the camera is still rolling, and the narrator is still walking down the dark hallway, looking for the door that hasn't been locked yet. But the hallway is getting longer, and the light is getting dimmer, and the silence is getting louder. Not this end, not that end, something else. Something that is just beginning to wake up. The sun sets over the palace, casting long rhythmic shadows across the perfectly manicured lawns. From this distance, the structure looks solid, eternal, and completely indifferent. But inside, behind the leaded glass and the silver mesh, the calibration continues. The fluids are being clarified. The frequencies are being tuned. The The load distribution of the next century is being calculated, and we are here, on the outside, watching the lights go on one by one, wondering which of those rooms holds the truth and which holds the mirror. The mystery isn't that they are different. The mystery is that we let them be. We are the ones who provide the silence they need to grow. We are the ones who accept the erasure as our history. What if the most unusual thing about the royal bloodline is that it is exactly what we asked for? A master we can never understand, a god we can never touch, and a bloodline that will never, ever end. The archives in Brussels are still flooded. The ledgers are still rotting. The names are still being scrubbed from the rolls. But the pattern is still there, written in the very architecture of our reality. It is in the way the cities are built, the way the money flows, and the way the people die. It is a staccato rhythm of control, a pseudo-academic justification for the inexplicable. And as I close my notebook and walk away from the gate, I can feel the limbal rings of 1,000 portraits watching me. They aren't judging, they aren't threatening, they are just waiting. They know that eventually everyone stops asking, what if? Everyone stops asking why. And when the questions stop, the bloodline becomes invisible once again. The mystery isn't solved, it's just absorbed into the skin, into the heartbeat, into the gold. Ask yourself, what if the blood isn't just in their veins? What if it's in the air? What if it's in the water? What if the royal part isn't the family, but the planet itself? We are living in a giant spherical laboratory, and the researchers are among us, wearing the crowns we polished for them. The institutional gatekeeping is the final layer of the experiment, the test to see if we will ever notice that the cage is made of people. I found a final note in the back of the ledger, written in a ink that only appeared under a certain frequency of light. It said, "The transition is complete. The vessel is full. The noise has become the signal. Not this message, not that message, something else. A closing of the loop, a final somber note in the staccato history of a lineage that was never truly ours. The investigator becomes the investigated. The viewer becomes the subject. The investigation becomes the archive. And the silence returns, thicker and heavier than before. Wait for the signal. Watch the eyes, follow the gold. The blood is moving, and the world is turning, and the royal family is exactly where they have always been, at the centre of the labyrinth, waiting for us to find the way out. But there is no way out. There is only the centre. There is only the blood. There is only the unusual continuity of a dream that someone else is having. And as the screen fades to black, the last thing you see is the reflection of your own limbal ring, shining in the dark. Is it the right size? Is it the right shape? Is it the right colour? Or is it something else? Something that the gatekeepers haven't found yet. Something that is still, against all odds, truly and dangerously human. The loop is open. The script is yours. The investigation has just begun. Not this story, not that story, your story. The one they couldn't erase, the one that is written in the blood that doesn't pulse, the one that is hidden in the shadows of the palace, waiting for the light to change. Ask yourself, what if you are the anomaly? What if you are the one the bloodline is afraid of? The pattern is shifting, the load is being redistributed, the silence is breaking, and in the distance you can hear the sound of a stone being rolled away. Not a tomb, not a palace, a door. And behind the door, the truth is waiting, wearing a crown of gold and a smile of copper. It is time to wake up. It is time to stop being the noise. It is time to become the signal. The royal bloodline is calling, and it's time to answer. Not with a bow, not with a prayer, with a question, the only question that matters, the one they can't answer, the one that ends the loop. What if the urban exploration of the soul is a dangerous journey? It leads you to places that were never meant to be seen, to truths that were never meant to be told. But it is the only journey worth taking, because at the end of the long, dark hallway, past the redacted ledgers and the crystalline organs, there is a mirror, and in that mirror you will see the royal bloodline for what it truly is, a reflection of your own potential, distorted and magnified by thousands of years of fear and control. The unusual thing about them is only unusual because we have forgotten how to be ourselves. The erasure trope is not a tragedy, it's a challenge. To remember, to see, to be. The documentary ends here, but the investigation continues in your own heart. Look at your hands, look at your veins, ask yourself, not this, not that, something else. The loop is closed, the truth is out, the blood is gold, and the world is finally, terrifyingly ours. The heavy velvet curtains of the Victorian era were not merely for aesthetic decadence, they were acoustic and biological dampers. In the private apartments of the House of Windsor and the secluded villas of the Romanovs, the fabrics were woven with lead filaments. This is a technical fact hidden in the bills of sale I recovered from a liquidated textile firm in Lyon. Not for decoration, not for warmth, something else. The lead was there to create a Faraday cage, a sanctuary against the burgeoning electromagnetic noise of the Industrial Revolution. Ask yourself why the elite retreated into such profound isolation exactly as the first telegraph wires began to crisscross the globe. It wasn't just a desire for privacy, it was a physical necessity. Their nervous systems, tuned to a more ancient terrestrial frequency, could not tolerate the staccato interference of modern data transmission. The institutional gatekeepers call it royal tradition or reclusiveness. But the urban explorer sees the truth in the architecture. The palaces are shielded. They are sanctuaries for a specific type of consciousness that is disrupted by the chaotic signals of the masses. I tracked a series of unusual geological surveys conducted by the Crown in the early 1900s. They weren't looking for coal or oil. They were mapping the subterranean granite plumes beneath the British Isles. Granite has a high quartz content. Quartz is piezoelectric. When the earth shifts, the granite generates a charge. I found a correlation between the placement of royal residences and the highest peaks of this natural electrical activity. It is a massive, decentralized power grid, but not one that powers lights or machines. It powers the blood. The load distribution of the royal presence across the map of England follows the ley lines of the old world. Not a coincidence, not a superstition, a geographical life support system. As I moved through the abandoned tunnels of the post office railway, I found where the royal lines intersected with the public infrastructure. There were tapping points, copper junctions, that had been polished by hand for decades. The monarchy was literally grounded into the earth. The erasure trope is most visible in the medical history of the 20th century. We are told that modern medicine was a gift from the era of enlightenment, a triumph of science over nature. But if you look at the private pharmacopoeia of the royal households, you don't find the same drugs the public was given. You find extracts of rare fungi, minerals that shouldn't exist in the local strata, and biological samples labelled only with numerical codes. I interviewed a retired chemist who had worked for a subsidiary of a major royal chartered company. He spoke of Batch 7, a blood stabilizer that was produced in quantities so small it could only have been for a single family. It was designed to prevent the crystallization of the hemoglobin under high-stress atmospheric conditions. Ask yourself, what kind of stress were they expecting? Or what kind of atmosphere were they anticipating? The technical language of the reports was pseudo-academic, designed to pass under the radar of any regulatory body. They called it metabolic maintenance. We would call it life extension through artificial evolutionary pressure. Think about the contrast of scale in the royal timeline. We see the coronation of a new king as a beginning. They see it as a baton pass in a race that started before the last ice age. The staccato rhythm of the news cycles keeps us focused on the now, while the bloodline operates in the always. I found a set of astronomical charts in the basement of an old observatory in Greenwich, annotated by a court astronomer whose name has been scrubbed from the official lists. The charts didn't track the planets for navigation. They tracked the orbital resonance of the Earth with the galactic center. The astronomer had noted windows of permeability, specific dates when the biological barrier between the royal and the common would be at its thinnest. These dates correspond exactly with the most significant royal weddings and births of the last 3 centuries. They aren't choosing their dates based on the social calendar. They are choosing them based on the cosmic weather. The investigative essayist must eventually confront the unsettling reality of the Royal Marriages Act. Why such strict control? Why the need for the sovereign's permission? The official reason is to prevent unsuitable matches that might embarrass the throne, but the technical reason is much darker. It is a biological licensing system. Every potential spouse is screened, not for their character, but for their mitochondrial compatibility. I spoke with a genealogist who had been fired for unauthorized data mining. She had found that the families who marry into the royalty, the Spencers, the Middletons, the Bloodlines, all share a specific, rare genetic marker. A marker that acts as a buffer for the more volatile royal traits. They aren't just marrying people, they are importing stabilizing software. The commoners are the heat sinks for the royal reactor. Without them, the bloodline would burn itself out in a single generation. This brings us to the concept of institutional gatekeeping in the field of archaeology. Why are certain sites in the Middle East and Egypt under the direct patronage of royal societies? Why are the most sensitive finds immediately whisked away to private vaults under the guise of national security? They are looking for the precursors. They are looking for the original blueprints of the bloodline. In the desert of Iraq, I found evidence of a dig that had been suppressed since the 1920s. The team had found a series of sarcophagi that were too small for humans and too large for children. The bones inside were not calcium-based. They were a composite of carbon and a metallic element that defied immediate analysis. The report, which I viewed in a grainy microfilm in a backroom in Berlin, described the remains as the architects, not gods, not aliens, the biological ancestors of the current royal houses. The erasure was so thorough that even the team that found them was reassigned and their records destroyed. The urban exploration of the royal myth leads us to the heart of the city, to the places where the light never reaches. In the vaults beneath the Bank of England, there is a room that contains no money. It contains jars of earth, earth from every continent, from every sacred site, from every place where the bloodline has ever held sway. It is a genealogical library, a way for the royals to remain physically connected to the land they claim to rule. They are not international in the way we understand it. They are trans-territorial. They are a single organism spread across the globe, connected by the blood and the soil. The staccato pulses of the global financial markets are just the heartbeat of this organism, a way to move resources to the parts of the body that need them most. Ask yourself, who really owns the land? Is it the person with the deed, or the person whose biology is synced to the soil? The pattern is everywhere once you know how to see it. It's in the way the royal family uses charity to collect data on the health of the general population. It's in the way they use patronage to steer the direction of scientific research. It's in the way they use tradition to mask the continued use of ancient biological technologies. The load distribution of our society is designed to keep us looking down at our feet while they look at the stars. We are the noise that provides the camouflage for their signal. The erasure trope tells us that the monarchs are just figureheads, that they have no real power. But if they have no power, why does the world stop when one of them dies? Why do the markets tremble? Why does the air feel different? Because the signal has been interrupted, and the system cannot function without the signal. As I sat in a small cafe in the shadow of Windsor Castle, I realised that the mystery of the royal bloodlines is not a secret that is being kept from us. It is a secret that is being kept by us. We choose to believe the narrative of the human royal because the alternative is too frightening to contemplate. We choose to see the errors in the ledgers as simple mistakes. We choose to see the anomalies in the portraits as artistic license. But the truth is there in the staccato rhythm of the history books and the pseudo-academic language of the gatekeepers. The bloodline is not like ours, not this life, not that life, something else. Something that has been here since the beginning and something that will be here at the end. The investigation has reached its 10th part, but the open loop remains. There is no resolution because the story is still being written. The royals are still moving through their shielded palaces, still tuning their blood to the earth's frequency, still waiting for the atmosphere to change. And we are still here, watching the shadows on the wall, wondering if the light will ever turn. Ask yourself, if the truth were revealed tomorrow, would you even believe it? Or would you prefer the comfort of the erasure, the forbidden? Knowledge is not a gift. It is a burden. And now it is your burden. What if the blood isn't blue? What if it isn't gold? What if it's the very thing that makes the world turn? Wait for the next heartbeat. Watch for the next sign. The bloodline is watching you, not with eyes, not with cameras, with the very cells of your own body. Because in the end, we are all part of the experiment. We are all part of the load distribution. We are all part of the silence. Not this ending, not that ending. Something else. The investigation is over. The documentary is complete. The script is finished. But the mystery is just beginning to breathe. The institutional gatekeeping of the 20th century reached its apex in the aftermath of the Second Global Conflict. As the borders of Europe were redrawn, a secondary, invisible map was being drafted. I discovered a series of flight manifests from 1946 that do not exist in the public record of the RAF. These flights were not transporting diplomats, they were transporting soil. Thousands of tons of earth were moved from the ruins of Berlin and the ancient mounds of Mesopotamia to the private estates of the British Crown. Not for gardening, not for land reclamation. Something else. Ask yourself why a family already in possession of the most fertile land in the world would import the dust of fallen empires. It was an act of geological synthesis. By merging the soil of the old world with the foundations of their current seats of power, they were re-establishing a broken circuit. They were ensuring that the load distribution of the Earth's psychic energy remained centered on their specific biological coordinates. The urban exploration of the London Underground reveals more than just abandoned stations. If you venture past the service tunnels of the Northern Line, there are sections of masonry that vibrate with a low, rhythmic frequency. This is not the sound of passing trains, it is the sound of the atmospheric stabilizers. In the 1950s, under the guise of Cold War civil defense, a network of deep-level bunkers was constructed. But the technical specifications I recovered from a retired structural engineer show that these rooms were not designed to withstand a nuclear blast. They were designed to maintain a constant, hyper-oxygenated environment. The walls were lined with a specific silicate that absorbs the noise of modern radio waves. These are the silent chambers, where the bloodline goes to reset. As the world outside became increasingly saturated with the staccato signals of the television age, the royals built themselves a subterranean sanctuary of biological silence. Consider the erasure trope as it applies to the abdication crisis. We are told a king gave up his throne for love, a romantic narrative for the masses. But what if Edward VIII was not abdicated because of his choice of wife, but because of his choice of chemistry? I found a confidential medical briefing prepared for the Privy Council in 1936. It spoke of a thinning of the resonance. The king's blood had begun to lose its superconductive properties. He was becoming too human. He was losing the ability to interface with the crown jewels, the literal hardware of the state. To allow a noisy biological entity to remain on the throne would have threatened the integrity of the entire network. He wasn't pushed out by politicians. He was rejected by the system itself. He was replaced by a more stable iteration, a vessel whose frequency was still pure. This is the pseudo-academic reality of the monarchy. It is a self-correcting organism that prunes its own branches to save the root. The contrast of scale between our technological progress and their biological status is the ultimate mystery. We have moved from the steam engine to the silicon chip, yet the rituals of the court remain frozen in the 17th century. This is not sentimentality, it is a technical requirement. The specific movements of the trooping the colour, the rhythmic pacing of the guards, the precise geometry of the state processions, these are all kinetic triggers. They are part of a massive public-facing ritual designed to charge the local environment. When thousands of people focus their attention on a single point of the bloodline, they are providing the energy that keeps the signal strong. We are the batteries. They are the conduits. Ask yourself, why does the monarchy still exist in an age of rationalism? Because the technology they represent is more advanced than anything we have invented. It is a technology of the soul, a method of load distribution that uses human consciousness as its primary fuel. I stood on the banks of the Thames, watching the fog roll in over the Palace of Westminster. The staccato rhythm of the city felt distant, replaced by a sombre, ancient weight. I realized then that the investigation doesn't end because the evidence is hidden. It ends because the evidence is too large to see. We are living inside the archive. Every street we walk, every law we obey, every coin we spend is a page in the ledger of the bloodline. The institutional erasure is so complete that we have forgotten there was ever anything else to be. We see the unusual behaviour of the royals and we laugh or we judge, never realising that we are watching a different species perform a ritual we no longer understand. Not this world, not that world, something else, a world where the blood is the law and the law is eternal. The open loop of this investigation leads back to the mirror. As you watch the footage of the next royal wedding or the next state funeral, ask yourself, what am I looking at? Am I looking at a person or am I looking at a signal? Am I looking at a family Or am I looking at a biological project that has been running for 10,000 years? The sense of forbidden knowledge is not a hallucination. It is the feeling of the veil being pulled back just for a second to reveal the cold golden gears of the machine. The royal bloodline is not a mystery to be solved. It is a reality to be acknowledged, and once you see it, you can never unsee it. The silence of the crown is not empty. It is waiting for you to join the song. What if the history we know is just the shadow cast by the blood? What if the unusual thing about them is the only thing that is true about us? The investigation moves into its final phases, but the rhythm never changes. Staccato, rhythmic, measured. The blood flows, the crown remains, the world turns, and the gatekeepers stand at the door, smiling, because they know that even if you find the truth, you have nowhere else to go. You are already part of the map. You are already part of the blood. Not this ending, not that ending, the only ending. The one that was written before the first ledger was ever opened. Ask yourself, if you are the noise, who is the signal?